Hello, and welcome to Kazingram Dialogue, a podcast dedicated to having honest conversations on the issues most important to life and to our culture. You can find us online at kazingram.com. That's KAZINGRAM.com. We hope you enjoy this episode. Be sure to like and subscribe.
Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the Kazingram Dialogue podcast. Happy Thanksgiving to our American audience. Our guest today is Karen Stiller. Karen is a senior editor of Faith Today, one of Canada's leading Christian magazine. She's also the host of the Evangelical Fellowship of Canada's podcast, and she is the moderator of the annual Religion and Society series at the University of Toronto. In this episode, we talk about Karen's recently released memoir, The Minister's Wife, what led her to write it, the social struggles and blessings of being a minister's wife, on making friendship, and as well as the importance of honesty for life and writing. Hope you enjoy this episode. Please welcome my friend, Karen Stiller, to the Kazingram Dialogue podcast. Okay, Karen Stiller, thanks for being here.
Thank you, IJ.
I'm actually quite excited to talk to you. I've been rereading your book because I read it after it was released. Was it released in August?
May.
Yeah. Okay, and then we pre-ordered it on Kindle, so I read through it the first 2 months or 3 months, and then when we finalized that we were going to do this podcast, I was like, okay, actually I have to go back and refresh. So I'm actually very excited to talk to you about this. This is a memoir, right? And you are basically revealing the insights of what happens within a pastoral family, or minister's family, which a lot of people don't have access to. When you wrote this book, and when you finally decided, okay, this is the book I'm going to write, I'm putting it out there, were you nervous when the pre-order hit?
Yes. In fact, I'm nervous just sitting here hearing you say that you reread it. I've had a couple of people very kindly share with me that they were rereading it. And I don't know, that feels even more vulnerable. I feel like, they're going to be reading it more closely or something. So I don't know. That's a funny writer thing, maybe. But yeah, I was nervous. Nervous about being disliked, actually. And I think, the desire to be liked is a core drive in all of us. But I recognize it as particularly strong in me. And so I knew that I was revealing things like my impatience, my envy. I have a chapter called Envy.
Yeah.
Envy is ugly for a lot of people. And in fact, I've had some people say, the only chapter I don't relate to is the one about envy, which...
Really?
Yes.
That's funny you bring that up, because that's the one chapter that I wanted to talk about later on. And because you talk about how there's a story of this couple that came over to your house, and they're like, wow, you have such a really nice house, or you have much better things than ours, or something you said.
Yes.
And I was just thinking about how easy it is. I mean, in terms of envy, I think of it more in terms of keeping up with the Joneses type of like the very status oriented. Oh, you have this, I should get this. My friend has an X car, I should get the next model. And it may be competitive, but after a certain point, it seems more like you start getting things that you don't like to impress people that you don't necessarily like either.
That could really be a thing. Yeah, that was an interesting chapter for me to wade into. And, in terms of, you mentioned about being nervous, I will say that as strong as my nervousness about sort of not being liked, probably was my nervousness about how people might read it and think that I don't love them or something. Like, so for example, that particular story that you mentioned, the book is a memoir, as you say, spiritual memoir, like it's all true. So I had to give some thought about telling that story, even in case, it was years and years ago that incident happened, where people who attended our church came to our house and said, your stuff is better than ours, as if it was like, a competition maybe, or I think what stumped them was that they had a certain idea of how clergy would be living. And
they'd be living with like very minimal things, very dark.
Exactly. And that surprised them. And I feel the need to explain, which taps into the same reality, that what they were commenting on was all hand-me-downs from Brent's parents, who had really nice stuff. So they, in fact, were thinking probably that we had better stuff than we did, which we couldn't have had even if we, could have. We didn't have that good stuff. So it's just this funny little trap we get into comparing each other, but comparing ourselves to each other. But I did worry about them reading it and thinking, oh, was that us? And oh my goodness, what did we say? So yeah, there's all kinds of nerves.
Did you, when you were writing the book, and because you tell quite a few stories in there, were you going back to some of your friends and saying, hey, I'm writing this, there's no name, but this is about you, just to make sure that there's no misunderstanding from their end? Did you do that?
I did do that.
Yeah.
Almost for all of them. Not for all of them. For example, not that one. Yeah. Because I just felt like, I could have probably found the people if I had done some digging, but I wasn't in touch with them. And I felt like, it would just be too embarrassing. And I didn't see the sense in that because, as you say, most of the stories I tell, I don't name the people, or it's their first name only. But even when I didn't name the people, most of them I did go back and I said, I'm writing this book, or I find myself, to my surprise, writing this book, and I have shared this story, and I want you to know, and I want it to be okay with you, basically. So I knew that was the only way I'd be able to sleep at night, actually, once the book was out. And the more like personal, tender stories, like I share a story about my sister and some loss that she's experienced. As I felt myself starting to write about that, I didn't plan on writing about it, about the death of her husband and the grief life that followed that. I thought, I need permission before I start. So I asked her, I said, I feel myself going in this direction. Can I proceed? Just give me a green light or a red light, and I promise you I'll show it to you, and you can, say no. And so she said, yeah, go ahead. And then she said, yes, go ahead again, which I was thankful for. But yeah, there are different opinions about that in the writing world. Like some writers would not show their stuff ahead of time and just, kind of take what comes. But I really knew that I needed it to be okay with people.
When you say not show, meaning just write it and then publish it and then people find out that they're in this book? Really?
I think so. Yeah. I mean, I don't even know all the permissions stuff required. Like if you're, first names only, and you're writing from your perspective, like you're telling your story. You're not necessarily telling their story. Our stories always bump up against each other, right? So even this podcast, we'll both experience it in a different way. And if you were to write about it, you wouldn't need my permission to do that. Right. So, but don't worry, I'm not going to go write about this unless something goes really wrong.
You were mentioning how you were nervous, especially, and how it was easier for you to sleep because you had asked these people if you could write about them. Those conversations, when you approached them, was it more of a, hey, I'm writing this book, I'd like to write about what happened between, this particular story that happened to us? Or was it like, how would you approach a conversation like that?
Yeah.
Or would people, like, if you said, hey, IJ, I'm thinking of mentioning you in this book, I'm like, oh, great. Whether it's, I wouldn't think twice about it unless it was something terrible.
Yeah. It was always, the deed was done when I approached the person. So I will give you an example. I tell the story in the book about a woman who I was visiting with my dog, who was acting as a therapy dog then. And I discovered this woman, Millicent, who was 100 years old, was a minister's wife, a widow, a minister's widow, I guess. And we had this sort of lovely short-term relationship grow out where I visited with her weekly with my dog, and then we were moving. So I told her, Millicent, we're moving, and she blessed me, and it was a very beautiful moment, and I wrote about it in my book. And then I wrote about it freely, and then when I actually had signed a book contract and realized, this book is actually happening, well, I guess it was a little before that, but I knew it was probably going to happen. Then I found her daughter and I said, I feel it, I want you to know that I've written a book and I have a passage about your mom in it. And I wanted to make sure that was okay. And her first reaction was, that is not okay. My mother's a very private person. And so I said, well, could I read it to you? And I read it to her. And she really liked it. And she was like, yes, thank you. And please go ahead. So I had the freedom that I needed, that I felt I needed in my heart to go ahead. If she had said no, I mean, I was taking a bit of a risk because I really loved that. It's probably one of my favorite scenes in the whole book. But I just, again, I didn't want to trespass. But when you're a writer, writers write. That's what we do. And people bump into our lives and sometimes we write about them. And so I guess if you're friends with a writer, be careful. Be nice.
Do you find that, because you've been writing for decades.
Yeah.
Right. You're a very good writer. Do you find that as you've become more experienced, as you've written more and more of your content's out there, that your sense of being vulnerable and being afraid of what people might think that decreases over time, or does it just remain? Does it go linearly with more experience? Does it just get worse?
That's such a good question. Let me say that I wrote this book. I'm going to answer your question this way. I wrote this book within a program, like a master's program. I went back to school. I did a Master of Fine Art and Creative Nonfiction. And we needed to come up with sort of within the first couple of weeks, like a working book title and an idea. And my initial title was The Worst Minister's Wife in the World. That was my, I guess in a way, tongue in cheek. But also it was like, me setting the stage for knowing that I was going to be writing about myself and the life of church leadership or clergy or, whatever, the heart and the soul of a person who people might think have it all together in a way that might surprise people and disappoint people even. So I definitely had a new level of maybe fear in writing this book because I was writing in a more personal way than I've ever done. Like typically I've been writing for 25 years or so, and it's been mostly journalistic writing or telling other people's stories basically. But I'm 54 and I'm,
Still very young.
Thank you. And I was ready to do that. And I felt like, no, I know some stuff. I'm comfortable in my own skin. I've learned some things. And I know I'm still learning, and there's a confidence in that, in knowing that you're still learning, right? Yeah. So that is a freeing thing when it comes to being vulnerable. And I will say that sort of playful title I had, The Worst Minister's Wife in the World, pretty soon after the book came out, and particularly other ministers' wives were reading it, I heard back, and I keep getting these lovely messages every now and then. Me too. Yeah, thank you. Yeah. I see myself in this. I don't feel so alone. So that for me was like, oh, that's a gift to me. I'm not the worst minister's wife in the world. Like there's a lot of us out there, and of course we're not alone. So almost always, like what I've learned about vulnerability is it takes one person in the room to put up their hand, and then it just breaks it wide open, and other people then feel free to say, yeah, me too.
Yeah, especially as a minister's wife, if you're, within your particular story, you guys travel to this, I forget what the town is, but it's a small town, and you're there, and you've uprooted yourself with your previous friends. Now you have to make new friends. But then what's even worse is, as a minister's wife, you have this external pressure, and then that internal pressure as well to perform or to be prim and proper.
Yeah.
So when you wrote that book, I'm sure a lot of the minister's wives probably felt like, oh yes, okay. So the feelings that I have of being envious or having doubts or struggling, maybe fighting with my husband who's a minister, and we're supposed to be the prime example. I'm sure for a lot of them they were thinking, yes, I'm glad someone finally brought it out, because I don't think there are many books about being a minister's wife and what that entails, and because being a minister also has their own stereotype, but it's more so the behind the scenes of being a minister's wife. You have the church. The church is all looking to you to be, the go-to example of what it is to be a woman, what it is to be a mother, what it is to be a wife. So when you were writing this book, especially as a writer, and when you told Brent, your husband, that you were writing, what was his initial reaction?
Yeah, he was so good. Like he is a good husband. And I interviewed somebody for an article that I was writing a few months ago, and she gave me language for this. And she's a published author in the States, and we were talking about marriage, and she said that she feels that her husband's hand at the small of her back, nudging her toward every open door. And I just loved that image, because that is what my husband has been for me. And I think that's what you are for your wife. Like you're like, you want your spouse, whatever, to keep growing, to fill their space and say yes to good things in their lives. And so that's what Brent has always been like for me. And I remember years ago, I was invited to go on a writing trip to visit a refugee camp in South Sudan. And at the time, South Sudan had just become its own country, newest country in the world, but it was still kind of a frightening thought to do this. And I had like 2 weeks to decide. It was this crazy opportunity to decide whether I was going to go on this trip. Like, it was all very like, oh. And Brent was like, well, you're going to go, aren't you? And I was like, can I? And not in a asking him permission way, but just in a like, do it? Yeah, exactly. And it was like, absolutely, I think you should do this. So he's always been that voice for me, that absolutely, I think you should do this voice, even though, like, of course, I have dumb ideas sometimes too, but generally. So when I found myself with this opportunity to write about anything I wanted to write about for this master's program, I realized I had the opportunity to give myself the freedom to do a deep dive into my own heart and my own soul, and do that work of excavation that writers talk about in a way that I've never just taken the time to do as a writer. Like, I've written on demand for reward as a writer. So I've never been a writer to take 5 hours on a Saturday morning and just ponder. I just don't have that discipline.
Really?
Yeah. So for me, this program, it was like, okay, I can write about anything I want. And so I definitely had a conversation with Brent at that stage. Like, yeah, I think I'm going to write about being a minister's wife. And he was like, oh, I think that's a great idea. And then at some point I was like, but I'm not going to show you any of it. And he's like, I don't want to see it. So we had an agreement. And I think mostly it was because actually I didn't want him to critique the theology in the book yet. Because he does know stuff. And I didn't want someone who knew stuff like that interacting with me on it yet. So like, I have a chapter on prayer, for example, that I was particularly nervous about him reading. And I just thought, no, I'm going to write more freely if I don't think Brent is going to be reading it. But then, of course, I finished the program. At some point, I got feedback from my mentors in the program, like, oh, we actually think you have a book on your hands. Like, we're liking this book, and we're not even, quote unquote church people, and, keep moving. They were really encouraging me. So then I got an agent, and then, she started sending the book around. And when we had serious interest from a publisher, I said, it's really a good time for you to read the book, because if you don't like it, like in my heart, I knew if he didn't like it, I wouldn't move ahead. And I also knew that would be hard. I knew that I would have to really work through that in my own disappointment if he said, this book will hurt the church, or this book will hurt my work. So I printed it off. I put it in a binder. He went off on a study break, and he came back and he said, yeah, I love this book. So I was just like, oh, phew. And then, I think pretty soon after that, I said, what about the prayer chapter? I don't know why I was so worried about that, but he was like, no, I think it's really good. It's honest. So
you have, I'm sure with Brent being the minister and you being the writer, there must be, at least I find, with Kaylin, my wife, she's much better articulating ideas in general than I am. And so, like, when I was reading your book and I was going through some of the pages, some of the chapters, you articulate some of the feelings that I think people generally have, but never really bring out. There's this would be a very, like, the first one would just be, the story of you guys on the cruise ship, that awkward friendship that ended on the cruise ship, that expressing the disappointment that you went through, having been befriending this couple for, I think, 3 days or 4 days or whatever it was.
Right.
And all of a sudden they find out you're a minister, your husband's a minister, you're a minister's wife, and then the friendship kind of ends.
Yeah. Like
that expression of vulnerability there, and in the other chapters too. That's something that I've rereading it again. I really appreciate it. You have that section about I think it was when you and Brent started dating and then he broke up with you. right? And reading that chapter, I was like, oh, that's kind of funny. But you get drawn in so much. And so I'm sure when Brent was reading it, because Brent does his, yearly disappearance into the woods to read.
Yes.
I'm sure he probably felt it on a much higher and deeper level, because it's your story together.
Yes.
But obviously your story specifically.
Yeah. It's interesting, that opening story where we were actually at an all-inclusive resort in Cuba, when that happened, I've had a lot of people contact me and say that same scenario has happened to them.
Really?
That is a real true thing, that when people find out you're
minister
or the minister's spouse, they was like, oh, they worry about what they've said to you already. Yeah. I can see the mental rewinding happening. Like, what have I admitted? What have I disclosed? How much did I swear? Did I offer them drugs? Like all this work that they have to do. And then, so your hope, of course, is that they would just relax and accept you as they are. So my point in sharing that is that the power of sharing our true stories, like that one, for example, and the breakup story, which is that Brent basically breaks up with me and says, I don't love you, and I don't think I ever will. So, I could have not included that, but to me, it's so funny. Yeah. And it's such a funny, kind of warm story, only because we got back together and, he discovered he was incorrect. So when we share and tell our true stories, and maybe especially the painful ones, we give a gift to other people, right? That's the power of vulnerability. That's the Me Too moment that is beautiful. And that's how we, comfort each other, I guess, and just walk together. Yeah. So for me, as someone, as a writer, writing this kind of work, this spiritual memoir work, as we neared publication, I hope, ruthless. I was trying to be ruthless in pulling out the stories that were just self-indulgent, warm memory, and not that didn't serve the greater whole. So, for example, last night I made gingerbread cookies, and I was remembering how my daughter and I used to always create gingerbread houses that were truly awful. Like, we didn't know what we were doing.
Awful to taste or awful to look at?
No, awful to look at. Like, but, you know, fun. We had fun. And we would submit them, like enter them into this town gingerbread village that this town created in the library every year at Christmas. And our house always like out back, you know, literally on the other side of the railroad tracks, like on its own, a hut, because some people are really good at gingerbread. So anyway, funny story. It was in the book for a while, and then in the Christmas chapter, and then I pulled it out because it's like, it's a dear story to me. It's wonderful, but it was just like kind of a...
Like, it wasn't adding to the...
It wasn't adding. I had already
How many stories did you pull out?
I started to worry about my word count, actually, because, you know, a publisher wants the book to be a certain length and contracts with you to have it be a certain length. And I was editing out so much because, I mean, and that's just good writing. Good writing advice is almost always that you're taking out, you're stripping down, you're simplifying, usually you're not adding in as you know, near the end of things. So I don't know how many stories I took out, but a lot. I really kept streamlining it. And I think I did it. I think I did. When I went to the publisher in Chicago to read the book for the audio version, I was afraid of doing that because I thought, what if I hate this book? Because I hadn't read it from first, you know, to last for quite a while. But I read it through and I thought, well, it's okay. There's not a lot I would change, which I think for a writer or any kind of artist, I'm sure it's often you are just can't bear to look at something when it's done. But I'm not like saying it's so great. I'm just saying I wasn't filled with horror.
I didn't realize there was an audiobook version to this.
Yeah.
Was it released?
Yeah.
Really?
Yeah.
So how was that?
Oh my goodness. It was so much work.
Really? How long did it take you to record?
2.5 days.
8 hours, 8 hour days?
Not quite, because I started to wear down. Okay. You know, like kind of mid-afternoon, I was starting to garble. But yeah, it was really interesting because like you have to read, or they made me, I think this is probably always the case, exactly, you know, word for word. Like if I changed anything, that they would stop me. Nope, go back. And there are some funny parts of the book, I think. And it was interesting to me to hear the people who were recording me and see them. I could see them on screen interact with the book, like laughing and then sometimes laughing when I didn't mean for it to be funny. So that was like, oh, okay. And also I had to sometimes hold my ground. Like they would go, oh no, read that. Like, I can't think of the part, but read that sort of sarcastically because you mean that sarcastically. And I'm like, no, I didn't. Yeah. That's not meant to be sarcastic. So, you know, I had to keep holding my meaning.
I didn't know that's how they did it for recording. Would they get, so, you know, when you in the book, if you say as I'm writing, I don't remember if you put as I'm writing in there, but I'm thinking of like audiobooks where they'll be as I write this, when they read it, they say as I'm reading this.
Oh, I see. That's interesting. No, I didn't have a term like that. Okay. Yeah. What I did have was the name of some French items on a menu at the Museum of Modern Art in New York's restaurant that as I saw it coming towards me on the page, I'm like, I don't know how to say this. I have no idea how to pronounce these words. So I couldn't even try. So it's like, guys, I don't know how to say this. So I was texting my daughter who speaks French, and finally I think we Googled it as you do, and I stumbled through it. So that was the worst moment.
So this audio version is, have you listened to it?
No, I could not bear to do that.
You don't have any plans to listen to?
No,
because when it comes to audiobooks and when authors read their own audiobooks, it's much more enjoyable for the listener. I think at least I found, because the author knows what they're writing and how they intend that. sentence to be. Whereas if you get someone who doesn't really know what the intention is, and then they're reading it, then you could get like emphasizing things in the wrong places.
Exactly.
And so for you probably thought, oh, I know exactly. That's probably why it was much easier for you to hold your ground, because you're like, this is what I meant when I wrote this.
Exactly. Yeah, I can't imagine someone else reading something that's memoir. Although I did have to audition. You had to audition to read your own book? Yeah, they weren't going to have me do it if I couldn't do it. So I had to record a couple of versions of me reading a paragraph or two and send them to the publisher. Yeah. But you know what? That just made me feel like I was in good hands, actually. Oh. I thought, okay, I'm glad. I would have been, I guess I was just happy there was going to be an audio version. Like that was kind of thrilling, I guess, as a writer. And then I thought, okay, they're really taking this seriously. So, and then I was, I felt very supported and cheered on when I was doing it. But yeah, oh no, it would have been very strange. I think you're right. I would have felt very protective over the material if somebody was putting the wrong emphasis on something. It's like, this is not where you're supposed to emphasize it.
As writing a memoir, did you ever think while you were writing it that you were either too young to write one or too old to write one?
Good question. Somebody who loves me very much, not my husband, said to me during the writing, like when she knew what I was doing, it's like, aren't you a little young?
To write a memoir?
Yeah, to write a memoir. And also, you're not somebody, you're not a big ass somebody.
Right,
and that's an interesting, that is the power of memoir. Like I have come to love reading memoir because it is, again, that are true stories, right? And how they connect. So you don't have to be a big somebody to write a powerful memoir. So I didn't worry that I was too old, or I know I felt like I was just right. I felt like it was just the right moment for me.
Yeah.
My years of craft building as a writer, I felt like I'm not like, this was new for me. I'm not going to say I knew what I was doing, but I felt like I had the confidence as a writer and as a Christian that I could write about this thing. And I didn't know where it was going or anything. No one asked me to write this book. I mean, but I felt like I was in a good place and a good time of my life to do it.
Did you, in the process, did you learn something new about yourself?
Yeah, absolutely. I've learned that I'm honest. Like I keep having people tell me, you're so honest. Even I've started to meet with a spiritual director. I started that in the spring, and she says to me, oh, you're so honest. And I'm like, what are other people doing? Is everyone else lying? No, of course not. But so sometimes I worry I'm
too honest.
Yeah. I think, what am I too honest? But I don't think I'm too honest in the book. But I did worry about that as we mentioned.
Yeah.
I've learned that because I keep hearing that I must have some well of courage in me as a writer and as a person, and courage / confidence / humility that I know it's not humble to say you're humble, but like it all mixes in together in the writer's life.
Do you find, I think, the honesty side of you, as more people have told you, is it something that you've always had? I
don't know.
Like as a kid, where you're like, this thing sucks, I'm not doing this anymore.
I don't think so. No, I think I was more of a pleaser.
Really?
Yeah.
So that would be a drastic change.
Yeah. I don't know where that, I partly it's my marriage. I think I'm married to a truth teller and a truth demander. And so I had to, and I write about this in the marriage chapter, I had to realize that he wanted me to be my true present self and not pretend, so I think that was part of it. I think my faith, my development in my faith, that Jesus loves me just as I am, but also is calling me forward. It was a huge part of learning to be honest and truthful, and realizing that that it's not about being good. And when you realize it's not about being good, then you can deal with who you really are and what you really are. And so I think that was probably a big part of it. And then also, to be honest, in this life in the church, I think I realized quickly that if I wasn't going to dare to be myself, I probably, it seemed like it was going to be really hard, like really, really hard if you can't be yourself. And because there's such a pressure to pretend and to, pretend you have it all together, pretend your marriage is perfect, pretend your kids are perfect, pretend you have no doubts and no questions and all of that stuff, pretend you're better. That is a very real pressure. And I knew I couldn't fall into that, or I wouldn't last. So,
is there a point in time that you came to that realization?
I think it was more gradual. I do remember moments of clarity. I remember going to some Christian women's events early on in my Christian life, so that this would have been in my sort of mid-20s, I guess, and thinking, I don't belong here. This is not who I am. It was too pink. It was too frilly, too fluffy. Yeah. And I thought, this isn't how I think I am. And I don't think this is necessarily what being a Christian woman looks like for everybody. And so there was all these kind of clarifying moments, I think. And then we have been, and I think I say this in the afterword or the after notes in the book, I haven't had any big horrible experiences in the church. I have found the church to be a beautiful, yes, difficult, but ultimately a beautiful community to be a part of. So there are some ministers' spouses out there who can tell terrible tales. They've had trauma, they've had pain. I've met some women in particular who, they've stopped going to church. And so I don't have those kinds of stories. So I have completely wandered away from your question, IJ.
That's fine. That's fine.
So yeah, the decision to remain, to try to be authentic and transparent and vulnerable, it's an ongoing decision. But yeah, there are definitely moments where I thought, no, I have to pick my road and stay on it.
Do you think a lot of people, though, struggle with that, the honesty part, especially within the church? Often you come to church once a week,
right?
And you come in, you dress fairly nice. You come in, you look very put together. You sit beside your spouse, you're with your kids. Everything's very prim and proper. But then that 2 hours, 3 hours of that church service where you're talking to people afterwards, you don't really see the BS that you went through that week.
Yeah.
Maybe you had a massive fight just before coming to church. You don't see that. You put on a smile. And do you think that's something, though, the conference that you're talking about, the sort of fluffy, everything's well and dandy.
Yes.
That is a way to manage the struggle that people have? Is that why do you think that would be the case?
Yeah, I feel what happens on a Sunday morning is, a few things, I guess. There is the corporate worship part of church where we are all actually, at least in my Anglican tradition, we're all saying out loud together, we don't have it all together. Every week we do the confession and say, I have all the things I did and the things I didn't do, please forgive me. And so we are acknowledging individually and as a group that we aren't all together. But then, yeah, you're right. At coffee hour, we can shift back into pretending pretty easily. But that's just the reality of that short time. And so the church, of course, is more than just Sunday morning. It's the small groups. It's the friendships. It's the phone calls. It's the companionship on the way. And that's probably where the real unveiling and honesty happens and probably should happen. I don't know if you've had this experience, but I can, because I'm really, I think, bad at pretending. Like I can say Sunday morning, someone's like, how are you? And I'm like, good, fine, awful. I literally do that. Have you had a good week? I've had a great week. No, I haven't. It's been awful. Like I go there really quickly. And then I have to think, how much does this person actually want?
Because sometimes people ask you without actually wanting to know. You end up
Exactly.
like, how are you doing? And then you tell them, you're like, and then they just zone out.
Yeah, exactly.
Didn't hear anything. But that's something that everybody has to work on in terms of, if you're asking a genuine question, if you're asking that question, you should be listening.
Right.
Whether that's a terrible answer or a very good answer.
Yeah.
It's much more difficult, I think, because you have the tendency, I don't know if you have, I think you have Instagram.
Yes. I
do.
I try.
Or Facebook, you see people's, less so now on Facebook and Instagram, but before it used to be like, people would update what they're doing and how beautiful their life looks like.
Right.
So then, when someone asks you how you're doing and then you give a somewhat honest answer, you think back, oh man, is this going to damage our friendship that I'm just starting?
Yes.
Do
Yeah.
they think I'm being too honest if I share this? And I'm sure you had, as a minister's wife, that would be something you struggled building that friendship.
Right.
And I think you had one story where, I'm trying to remember exactly, you met a minister's wife at a dinner or at somewhere, and you connected and you were like, oh, you're a minister's wife too.
Yes. Yeah, that happens. Yeah. I think part of it is just like probably normal for everyone. We seek out people who are like us, right? Or share interests. But there is something about, and when I give advice to say younger ministers' wives or spouses, we keep saying ministers' wives. Let's talk about the elephant in the room, because some people have pushed back even at the title of the book, The Minister's Wife, because they're like, well, there's ministers' husbands.
Right.
And
but you're not a minister's husband.
Right. Thank you. Exactly. They should write a book.
Yeah, they should write a book. If you're complaining, you should go write a book.
Exactly. And I do think it's a little bit different for women married to clergy than men married, from what I understand. And it's not for me to say that, but I know a few ministers' husbands, and I think there's maybe if there's pressure, it's a different kind of pressure. So, but yes, I tell younger ministers' wives to find other ministers' wives and befriend them. And even if there's some things you don't have in common, there's enough that you do, and you can kind of, let your hair down or whatever in a way that is safe and free.
Yeah.
But
do you think that should be the case even if you were friends with someone within you or within your church?
I know this is so complicated. I don't know the answer. And I write about friendship in the book because the truth is I do have good friends in the church, and I always have had good friends in whatever congregation we're in, because, I can't help myself. I meet someone lovely and we get along, and why shouldn't we be good friends? So I absolutely hold that in one hand, while in the other hand, I hold the truth that it can go very badly wrong. And when it goes wrong, it can go very, very wrong. Very wrong. Yeah. All of a sudden they're mad at your husband, and then start talking to you about it, or like, it's just, there's so many variations of what can go wrong. So it's like a little bit, approach with caution. And the other thing that I haven't figured out and never will is that people also, I think, still maybe want their clergy to be a little bit set apart,
like distant from them,
a little bit, for when they need them. And I don't know that. I've read stuff about that, and so I'm not sure. I don't know if you can have a dinner party one night with someone and be friends and laugh hysterically and let them be silly and say dumb things, and then the next day go and say, I need to confess something. I need your help. Probably you can, but not everybody can. So it is a mystery, and I do not have the answer.
That is definitely a difficulty. I have friends who are ministers. I would think Brent's my friend as well.
Yeah.
But, younger gentlemen who are ministers. And, if I have them over for dinner, we talk casually as I normally talk. I'm, less, what's the word? I'm more, there's less of a barrier to the things I say.
Okay, interesting.
Well, I don't know what the word I'm looking for. I'm more open.
Yeah.
Right? More honest.
Yes.
More honest.
Yeah, that's good.
And so when I have these conversations with my friends who are ministers, it's not like I'm thinking in the back of my mind, oh, this guy is a minister. Is he judging me? Is he thinking, oh, I just talking some crap that I don't agree with, but I'm not going to say anything, and I wonder if that's partially because my dad's a minister and, I have conversations with my dad, but obviously dad and son relationships are different. But I'm thinking, I'm sure part of it is, especially if you're within the congregation and you have a minister, you have this view that as a minister, and I think rightly so, as a minister, someone becomes a minister not because they think, oh, I'm the best, or maybe they are the best, but with the understanding that they now have a task that's much greater than the rest. I think Paul talks about it.
Yeah.
Corinthians,
Yeah.
Basically, I'm paraphrasing Paul here, but practice what you preach.
Yeah. Right. I do think that even as we say, church leaders and ministers are just like everybody else, and just as like prone to all kinds of things, and we know that, we can see that in the news, right? They are called to something a little bit higher than that. And so I do think, like, even as I write about we're just like everybody else, I know that Brent has a distinct, specific calling that requires something of him that is special. Mm-hmm. So it is mysterious.
I wonder, because being a minister it's not like running a business. I mean, some ministers run their churches like businesses, but
right.
Being a minister is definitely not like running a business.
Right.
It's very different, but at the same time, I wonder if more people should be acting like ministers in their approach.
Yes, I hear that. I hear you. Yeah, I hear that. Yeah, because.
Excuse me.
Yeah. Basically, which I think is a very good point.
Yeah. So, sorry about that. That was my phone that I thought I put on silent, but I didn't.
I'm glad it was your phone and not my phone.
But yeah, I wonder if everybody should be more like ministers in their approach.
Yeah. I mean, I think that's really a good point about the call to holiness in all our lives and on all our lives. I think about one example in terms of friendships that I might have. So I'll give you an example where I think it could get weird, is if, like, of course, our marriage is just like anybody else's marriage. And sometimes, and this may come as a shock to you, but sometimes, women talk to each other about their husbands, and they might go like, he did this or lost it over that, or what do I do about this? And, whatever the conversation is. I have never felt that freedom to talk like that with a woman friend in a church that my husband is pastoring. And I think that's wise. And does that mean that I'm saying Brent's, may not bother me, or we may not have a fight that I need to talk to a friend about? No, but it would feel really weird to do that. Yeah, exactly. So then that hints to me that, there's still some barriers there and some guardrails to pay attention to, for the good of the church, for the good of my friend, So, I would love to be the person to solve this mystery for everyone, but I know I'm not going to.
So in the book, you're talking about how the church community was what really helped you, right? And we're talking about friendship and the difficulty of making friends within the church. That realization where you thought, it is, you knew a lot of people who had lost their faith, And so for you, it was being part of the church and
Yeah.
acting within the church that really helped you hold on to the faith.
Mm-hmm.
How much of community was friendship, and how little of it was friendship?
Oh, boy, that's a good question. I think part of my answer is that the church, in my mind, and I think should be for all of us, is always bigger than the local congregation. So there is the local congregation, but then there's my Christian brothers and sisters who live in other cities or go to other churches or lead other churches or are writers or whatever. And so they have helped form and nurture and sustain my faith as well. And so that's part of my answer. But the other part is that within the local church, when I think of, for example, I love women's Bible study groups. And that would be like very fertile ground for a lot of assumptions about the minister's wife. Betty, the minister's wife, is going to lead the Bible study this week. And but the fact is, I actually really enjoy leading Bible studies. And I like being with groups of women in church basements. And I just like everything about it. And also, what I like about it is the discipline it provides me in my life to have a deadline for reading the Bible or, reading this book that will help my faith. And so those are like spiritual friendships, I guess. And so that is the discipline of community that helps me stay rooted and grow. And so that's like, yeah, it's a form of friendship and we are helping each other. And then there's the friendship of reading, I'm a voracious reader and I always have been, and spiritual writing has helped me. Like a writer who I've always admired and who has helped me a lot has been Anne Lamott. And so she'd be probably, I don't know how old she is, 10 or 15 years older than I. But when I first read her, what I think was her first sort of spiritual memoir, which I believe is called Traveling Mercies, a light went on for me as a writer and as a Christian that I get to be this honest and write this honest. And so that would be another, she's my friend, even though she wouldn't know who I was, and I'm sure you have those friends too in your life. So yeah, there's so many ways to stay rooted.
Yeah. Do you find when you're doing these book studies or having these spiritual friendships, the conversations are they drastically different than the conversations with a very close good friend of yours?
Yeah.
Or are they
yes and no. They're different in that they're guided, right? Like if we're doing a Bible study together, we've decided for an hour, we're going to talk about this thing. It's rare that I have that kind of spiritual conversation with a friend.
What if someone from that group became your friend?
Which has totally happened. Then we have this base to keep referring back to. Yeah. That's helpful. And, permission to, talk Bible to each other, maybe, or whatever, and not think, oh, you're going to think I'm a weirdo. So, we have this like shared understanding and shared experience of studying scripture together or reading a book together that I think is, really good.
Do you find, when you're within this community and you have questions, doubt in general. Yeah. Do you feel, or in the past, that you had to keep it to yourself and not share it? Because then, it may come across poorly on Brent. Right.
Oh, that's interesting. Well, there is that verse about not leading another believer astray by, our bad behavior. So I think some people would apply that verse to this answer and say that, we don't have to, we share what is helpful and what is building up for the other person, but we also need to take care of ourselves. So I've never had a problem, in a Bible study group saying, I don't understand this thing. And partly I feel like that's actually been a gift, an unexpected gift I've offered by my honesty, by my willingness to look stupid, if you will.
Yep.
Because then other people realize that they can too. Like, I mean, I remember when we went to, when Brent went to seminary and he was doing his Master of Divinity, and I worked at the college, Regent College. So I was able to be present on campus every day, which was so great. It was such a gift, but that meant I could go to Bible studies and community groups. And I remember once, like this, I can't remember what professor it was, but he was like, let's turn to Habakkuk. And I was like, what? Like, I've never heard of that. Is that a thing? Or, and I have had that. I still feel insecure if I'm in a Bible study and they're like, okay, let everyone, Colossians 3. And I'm like, Colossians. Trying to remember the little verses.
Without going to the index.
Exactly. And so I still fight that.
Yeah.
To this day, that idea that people think I have this thing memorized and that I will know exactly where everything is and be able to quote scripture, and that, yeah, it's going to be like shocking to them that I don't. So then I've gone the other way. I'm like, I'm looking in the table of contents. Like, I'll make a big announcement about it. So if you need to look in the table of contents, go ahead.
Don't be embarrassed.
Don't be embarrassed. Yeah, please do that. Or as I have that, when our kids were little, we had these little, sing-along things that you teach kids to learn the order of the Bible books. I'm like, trying to remember that in my mind. Yeah, so that's like embarrassing and awkward, but it's
helpful though for people, especially if you feel this sort of pressure, or you feel this sort of pressure, and then you admit it that, hey, I'm also looking at the table of content.
Yeah.
And somebody else, Stacy, who, I'm just making up a name, Stacy, who doesn't know either, will feel like, oh, okay, if Karen doesn't know, then it's okay for me to not know, and I'm in the learning process as well.
Right.
Where I think
that's what I hope will happen. That's what I hope Stacy's thinking.
Yeah.
Not like she's the minister's wife.
How could she be the minister's wife? Yeah. It is helpful though. That having that honesty within a community, especially from someone, someone who's looked up to.
Yeah.
Because then, if that honesty is not there, and that idea of, I don't know, I'm still learning, is not there, then there's a sort of stagnation that can occur within the community, where everybody pretends that they know what they're talking about.
Yeah. And this idea that you can arrive at this level of knowledge and, holiness. Yeah. And I mean, I can feel, I still fight, and I mean, this won't be surprising, but I can meet another minister's wife, or read, more likely, another minister's wife, and feel again like intimidated. Like she knows, she's way better at this. She knows how to dress. She knows, like, she does not need the table of contents, and then, but sometimes, I mean, this is the other side of it. Sometimes it can be also an encouragement. It's like, well, should I still need the table of contents? And then I can think, yeah, maybe I need to study scripture more closely. Maybe I need to actually, be more disciplined in my devotional life. Like, there's also that part of it. So it's, on one hand, it's easy to kind of, like, make fun and laugh about how we're all a mess. But then on the other hand, I can go, yeah, okay, I could be better at that. And so that's a good thing too.
And I think that's the right way to approach things.
Spurring each other on. 100%. I think that's right.
There's something that I wanted to ask you, because as a writer, obviously, and being a voracious reader, I wanted to ask you, I mean, I'll tell you a funny story, but you can just look over there and we have Lord of the Rings, C.S. Lewis, and Harry Potter down there.
Yes.
And something that Kellen and I have talked about before is, I never grew up reading Harry Potter because of the witches, and the Wiccans, and all the witchcraftery stuff in there. But for you, did you read Harry Potter?
I did read Harry Potter, but I read it because, of course, we had children who were interested in it. So I mean, it's an interesting question. I'm trying to remember. Our first inclination was probably like concern, like what is this about? And then I'm trying to remember back then how old our firstborn Eric was, but I think I read it first, and then I'm like, no, this is a great story. It's okay.
So do you read books outside of Christian authors?
Yeah.
Like, would you read, ancient non-Christian writers?
I would. Have I? No, probably not ancient.
Old. We'll replace it with old.
Oh yeah, I love literature.
Yeah.
I love reading. I read as a reader, and I can also read as a writer, to learn. And so, yeah, absolutely.
Do you ever feel guilty reading non-Christian books? Like, should I be doing it? Should I be reading this? Is there a better?
Well, it's interesting because I definitely at some point in my life, I kind of cleaned up my reading life. Like in my 20s, I think I had been reading as a teenager, for example. I definitely read a lot of like really fluffy women's romance novels, I'd say. Like they weren't, there probably wasn't anything wrong with them, but,
just like
se.
Just like the you mean the sort of romance book you find in churches where it's like a very conservative minister's daughter falls in love with the farmer boy?
No. But, even then, like, it wasn't anything bad. Yeah. But just like really popular, almost like pulpy fiction for women that was just kind of silly. And so for me, it wasn't so much about like the morality of it so much as I can do better for my brain. So I just started reading like a little more difficult material, like a little more literary fiction, for example. Like, I don't know if you know the work of Alice Monroe. She's a Canadian female writer. She's won the Pulitzer. She's just a beautiful.
What kind of books does she write?
She's a short story writer mainly, but it's just beautiful the stories of Canadian women, basically. Like, it's fiction, of course, but so I just started to read better, and I think of her as like one of the better writers I discovered in my 20s that I love to think impacted my writing too, which that's a really bold thing to say, but when you read better, you write better. And I think that's definitely a true thing. So for me, it's more about, is it true and is it beautiful? And I have started books. I won't be able to, you probably wouldn't ask me for a title anyway, but I can't think of one. But I have started to read books before where I thought, this is not good for me. And I'm setting it aside.
Right.
Now, I've done that because of the plot, and also sometimes because it's so badly written, to be quite honest, which sounds really snobby, but it's true.
I'm sure for you as a writer, that would be so interesting because, I'm not a writer. So when I read, some of these books that like, for example, if I'm reading, there's this book right there called The Rational Optimist, which I just started by Matt Ridley. Okay. And I read it and I was like, wow, this is great writing. But then if I read someone like Nassim Taleb, which is the one in the white and red tabs on top.
Okay. Oh, yeah.
That guy writes like he has ADD.
Oh, interesting.
Just write in blocks and then just keep moving on. And I think, wow, this is such great writing. So for me, as someone who's not a writer, anyone who writes better than me, I think, is a great writer.
Well, and I don't think I'm always right. You know what I mean? Like, I think we could argue about, I think there are some standard things about what makes writing good. But definitely books appeal to different people at different times. And I've read, I do not write fiction, and I don't know how to, and I'm sure I never will. Like, I think I would need like training for that. But when I read a great novel, I'm just amazed and floored, But then I can read a novel and I'm like, what is wrong with all you people? How is this the best-selling novel in the whole world? So who knows?
Is it? Do you write? Do you keep a journal?
I do keep a journal.
Every day?
No, I've never had that discipline. I'm more. I have journals from different times of my life, And I'm much more disciplined now about a writing book. Like I have several writing journals where I will jot down ideas or thoughts or something that happened or.
Sorry, what's the difference between a writing journal and a journal?
That's a very good question. Okay, I don't know. I have this idea of a journal being like a personal journal, being more deliberately reflecting on the day or the events of the day. And a writing journal for me is more often interacting with something I'm reading or hearing or listening to. And I'll have a thought for something I might write about more fully later. So it might, whether it's a blog or, an idea for an essay or a piece or something. And I will say that's relatively new in my life since doing that MFA and sort of shifting or opening a new chapter in my writing life where I might write more about, me and my thoughts as opposed to interviewing someone and writing an article about them or whatever, which I do still do. That a few writing notebooks really help me.
So do you have a bunch of writing notebooks for different books that you're reading, or is it like,
I wish I was this organized. No, I have a bunch of writing journals because I
just open up one book.
It's whatever's handy. Yeah. And I love a clean, empty journal. So I buy them and then I write in them.
Do you find that's been helpful in your thinking process as you're, because I'm assuming you're writing down either quotes or things that have made you, or something that's made you reflect on a particular part of it. You just write it down.
Yeah. Like I almost always have a journal with me in church, for example. And sometimes if I forget
it, the same as a writing journal?
Yes. Okay. Yes. And if I forget it at home, sometimes I'll look around for a little piece of paper to write on. And sometimes I actually say, no, I'm going to discipline myself by actually not writing down thoughts this time. I'm going to try to just completely listen and not write things down. But writing helps me listen. And I'll think of, because I write spiritual things, I guess, church ends up often being a time where I do think of things or I experience something in my spirit that I think, I'd like to write about that. For example, I'll give you an example. This is so unspiritual, but that's the point of it. One time it was during the prayers of the people, which we have in our church. And all of a sudden I found myself thinking about Julia Roberts' marriage and thinking, they've managed to keep it together, like her and Danny, her husband, or whatever his last name is. I actually thought that thought during the prayers of the people. So now, because I've, learned so much, I know not to spend 10 minutes punishing myself for thinking that. I thought, no, I know what I need to do is just try to pray then. Pray, thank you God for this or that or whatever. Pray about the rabbit trail that I've gone on. But as a writer, I thought, that's funny that I thought that. And I wonder what all these people are thinking. And I was thinking, looking at the congregation thinking, if there were...
what they're thinking about.
Yeah, if there were thought bubbles above their heads, how interesting that would be. Are they all, and that's just kind of part of praying. So I haven't done anything with that yet. But for me, the writing journal would be somewhere. And one of them I've jotted down, thinking about Julia Roberts during the prayers of the people and how weird that is. And someday I'll write about that.
So do you have any intentions of turning something like that into another memoir?
I have been thinking more about writing a long thing again. I don't know. I don't know what it means in the life of a writer. I'm not a writer who aspired to write a book. Yeah. And even when, over the years when I've worked with writers and they're like, I'm going to write about a book about this and that. And I'm always like, a lot more people read an article, than a book. You don't have to jump to a book. You can write lots of things that people read. Yeah, exactly. So my bias has not been toward book writing, But having said that, I learned how to do it, I think, during this master's program I did. And I enjoyed the deep dive, even though it was so much work. Like, I was overwhelmed at how much work it is to write a book, that a book you don't regret. Like, there's a lot of rewriting, a lot of thinking, a lot of sculpting and crafting, and then doing it all over again. So I don't know how people churn books out, year after year. I really don't. So, it's a yes, no answer. I think I probably have more to say about church stuff, but I don't think the world needs The Minister's Wife Part 2 or anything. So I'm not sure.
Okay. If The Minister's Wife, your book, was published without any sort of redaction or removal of some of your stories, how different would it look? Like
if I published it again, you mean?
No, if you published it without you editing out some of the stories.
Oh, that's interesting.
Because I'm thinking, take Marcus Aurelius' meditation. He wrote it not for it to be published, but it got published, right?
Yeah.
And it's nothing. There's no real. There is an order to it, but it's not really any sort of particular order. But
right.
It's people love it. People read it, and so I wonder with yours too. Yours, I don't know what the non-edited version would look like.
It would be longer.
Much longer?
Probably 20% longer. The editing process was interesting in terms of they really worked to help me make the book better.
Sorry, when you say they, who are you
my editor.
Okay.
My editor and her team. So she had a couple of copy editors who worked with her. And there was one time where there was a helpful process of decision making about some hard passages that they allowed me to think twice about. So I tell the story of very early on, Brett and I visited the home of a retired minister. And in my mind, they were living in poverty and I didn't like it. And we left their house and I turned to Brent and I said, we are not ending up like that. And I think it's in the chapter on envy. And during the editing process, you get the material back with the comments and the track changes and all that stuff. And there was a question attached to that line. And they were like, take a second thought about this because it could sound off-putting to some people. And so just, think about that. Like, it sounds really harsh. And so I actually didn't think about it for very long because I was, again, I think I have the confidence in my honesty. I'm willing to risk being misunderstood for the point I was trying to make, and I also believe that I'm not alone in having those kinds of thoughts. So I felt fine leaving it in. And I was like, no, I want it in. Please leave it in. But it was helpful. It was like a sober second thought throughout some of the more, nakedly honest parts that might make me look like a really horrible person.
I don't think that's the case. The part where you were talking about, I think when you guys were at a birthday party at Dairy Queen.
Oh yeah, Chuck E. Cheese, I believe.
Chuck E. Cheese, and I think you made the comment about this your friend who was very well put together. Right. And that's something that I was thinking about, where I know we've already talked about this, but how many people would look at you and say, wow, Karen's so put together, she's a writer, they live in Ottawa, they have a house, whatever, they have a car, dogs, family. Yeah. And so that pressure. Right. Do you feel that pressure even now after you've written that book? Because it's quite an open book. Right. Open book. Yeah.
Pressure to appear to be a certain way, or
now that people have said, hey Karen, you're so honest, are you like, I gotta be very honest?
Oh, I see.
Like you're...
No, I don't think so. Because I think it really is just the way I am. Like, I think I really am an open book. And I think that's what we all need to be with each other and with God. So I feel like it's like the path of discipline and discipleship for me is to be honest in the embrace of a loving community. And the risk for any of us is that the community won't be loving. But
in your honesty.
Yeah. And that you'll feel, we all will get our feelings hurt. Like we'll all have our precious feelings hurt. And that's just the risk of loving and being honest and being vulnerable and, being clumsy too. I mean, I hurt a friend recently by being honest. This was like in COVID, pandemic stress. She was sharing with me her, sadness. And before I could receive her sadness over the situation and listen well, I felt I need to be honest with her about how she hurt my feelings about something. So I said, well, before we go any further, I just need you to know that blah, blah, blah. Because to me, I was just being honest. And to her, I was not listening.
Right.
And I was not there for her. And so that was interesting to me because I thought I expected her to just go, oh, sorry.
Right.
And that's all I needed.
And then continue with the conversation.
And then we just continue on. But it was more than that. Like my honesty was not well timed or like needed or like it was like a selfish honesty actually. So I've been thinking about that too. And yeah. Anyway, I didn't expect to bring that up, but just, like how we love each other and how we serve each other and how we're there for each other. Sometimes we won't be blah, 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 me, blah, blah. Sometimes we just need to listen well. And I think, for me being a minister's wife, like, that's been a hard part sometimes, but it's also been the privilege. And I've heard other people talk about this, that people will trust you quickly and they'll share with you quickly. And that's really a beautiful thing. It can be a lot sometimes because we're human and tired sometimes, but it's also a beautiful thing that people will entrust you to walk with them or just to listen and hold their story. And, you don't have to have the answer, but just to be someone who they can count on to listen well to them. So I like that.
Yeah, I like that. That's a very good point. And I think part of living well in this world is having those relationships where you can be open to potentially being hurt.
Right.
But then knowing that if this is a true friendship or true relationship, that the hurt that you endure is not, you're not going to endure it alone.
Yes.
And that's for the Christian, the advantage of, the advantage of religious people over non-religious people is that they have the community.
Yeah.
Not saying that non-religious people don't have communities, but you have that one advantage. If you move to a city, you can plug into a church and you can almost find that middle ground. The same foundation.
Yeah,
you can start.
I agree with you. I see more now at this stage of my life the difference that faith has made in my life, the good difference, and I agree with you. Other people have good, healthy communities, and we know that. But there's, the companionship of Jesus in my life and the reality of faith and the beauty of the beauty and the difficulty, of course, of church community, ultimately has been, a beautiful thing that I can't imagine living without.
So you were telling me before we started this podcast that you were thinking of, you're working on or thinking about a new book, I should say. Do you want to tell us what that?
Well, don't, it's very like not even a fully formed thought yet, but I keep.
This is still an embryo stage.
Yes. I keep coming back to thinking about this vulnerability thing. And vulnerability to what end, I think. And so and I'm also, okay, so there's that. Like, so I'm, we're also honest with each other about how, messed up we all are. And isn't that great and good? So we're in that together. But then, of course, we are called to a life of holiness, and we're not stuck in the mess, right? And I think that I think there's something to explore there. That even as I say that, though, I'm like a million other people have already explored that really well. Why in the world would
not
I?
From your perspective.
Well, I do.
Right?
I mean, that's what writers tell themselves. So,
well, I'm not a writer, so I'm not.
I don't know. I don't know.
I think there's something you're onto something. There's a tendency to say, within the Christian community, we're so messed up, but only by grace, blah blah blah.
Right.
And there's that a sort of victim mentality, like I can't do this because I'm not good enough, but I'm just going to pray to God, and then He'll give me strength. But being a human itself, you are very different from the rest of the social animals that you're part of. You have the ability to think. You have a brain. You have two opposable thumbs. You have, you can think abstractly. You can do so many things. There are lots of, non-religious people who've accomplished, and religious people who've accomplished lots of things.
Right.
Which, to an extent, I think, shows that it can be harmful to be overly, to overemphasize your messiness. Like,
yes.
Oh, I'm so messed up, I can't do anything.
Yes.
And then you're kind of paralyzed there.
Exactly.
You're
yeah.
stuck.
I mean, yes. You suck, I suck, we suck. When I was writing the Minister's Wife and going through it again, like, in the last few times, I was very aware of the word broken. And I was talking to Brent about this because the word broken can get overused in the way that you just said, like my brokenness, your brokenness, we're all broken. And so I went through it again thinking, it was really important for me to end the book with a chapter on holiness, because I want it to end there, beyond broken. And maybe that's a good title for another book, Beyond Broken, like that we're actually put back together, through God's grace. And then we can get on with the work of, kingdom welcoming and kingdom building. And that's really important. And I think that is genuinely good news.
I think that is the outlook. That would be a rationalistic outlook, rational optimistic outlook, where you're not pessimistic, because you have a tendency to look at your culture and your time period and think, oh, this is the worst time. I wish I lived in medieval Christianity. But then you're like, do you really want to live in no running water?
Yeah.
You have to, all that stuff. But Beyond Broken, that's a good potential book title. Where can people find you on social media? I don't know if your Instagram was a secret that I just gave away.
No. I'm on Instagram, and I think it's just Karen Stiller, easily found. I enjoy Instagram. I enjoy the kind of micro blogging opportunity there. Although you won't find beautiful photos of airbrushed life. I'm on Instagram, I'm on Facebook, and I have a website, karenstiller.com, where I do blog, because I am a writer who believes in blogging. I think... I have something,
I'll tell you something after we record this podcast.
Okay, good.
So karenstiller.com.
Yes.
Where can they find your book? Amazon.com.
Yeah, it's on Amazon. But small independent book sellers should be able to order it in. Okay. And so that's always a great thing to do. And the publisher's site has it as well, tyndalehouse.com. And in Canada, Chapters, Indigo, and so on. But yeah, it's great if people can buy it from smaller places, for sure.
I think that's the way to do it. Karen, thank you so much for this conversation. I appreciate you.
Thank you. It's been so fun. Thank you.